Hello, everyone. We are delighted to have you. Welcome to EduTalk 876. This is our 11th session. I am Trevor Cole. Today, hello, everyone. We are delighted to have you. Welcome.
You have to mute yourself.
So I am Trevor Cole. Today, Dr. Hardware and Dr. Walker, with our esteemed panelists, will be continuing the discussion on the importance of schools collaboratively working with parents to improve students' success. We can all agree that this is an important topic, especially in times like these. We would like to thank all our participants here on Zoom and viewers on Facebook and YouTube for joining in and for listening to this live session this evening. I know you might be wondering why we are going to be discussing this important topic, but for the past 2 years, we have seen tremendous changes in how schools are operated. In fact, there has been a drastic change in student engagement with concerns expressed among stakeholders, parents, and others, particularly those concerning learning loss and how to enhance student success and to improve discipline. In our last session, we discussed with our panelists ways in which schools in particular can work closely with our parents for students' success and holistic development. Specifically, we will be centering the discussion today around student discipline. Joining us today to share their professional advice, recommendations on the topic, parents collaboratively working with schools to improve student success, are Fiona Lloyd-Henry, Ricardo Brown, and Mr. Omar Smith. Now, Fiona is, she's a part of us now because she was in one of our sessions, the last session, and she is a coordinating principal for leadership, capacity building, and school partnership in Ontario, Canada. She's also an award-winning Black community advocate. She has been a classroom teacher, department head, and has served as the instructional resource teacher and instructional coordinator for equity and inclusive education. Fiona is dedicated to serving students and creating educational environments that are equitable, inclusive, and free from discriminatory practices. She also values the development of student efficacy and social activism. Fiona is a PhD student at the University of Toronto. She serves on a number of boards and is currently a part of the not-for-profit organization that advocates for Black children. Mr. Brown, Ricardo Brown, is a detective sergeant with over 20 years of experience in the Jamaica Constabulary Force. He hails from the community of York Castle, right here in St. Anne, Jamaica. He's a past student of the Fernport High School. Mr. Brown is the holder of a bachelor's degree in business administration, and he also possesses an associate degree in business administration from the University College of the Commonwealth. He has received several awards and recognitions, both professionally and socially. Most notably, 2019 LASCO Top Cop for Narcotics Division island-wide, and in 2021 joined Parent of the Year at the St. Anne's Bay Primary School. He serves in various capacities at the early childhood, primary and secondary levels, and he's currently the PRO for the St. Anne's Bay Primary School PTA body. Mr. Omar Smith is from fishing village right here in Jamaica, Port Maria. After working in Jamaica for some time, Mr. Smith journeyed to Canada to pursue his studies in hotel management. His background in soccer, so he loves football, earned him a scholarship, and he pursued a bachelor's degree in hospitality management. He completed his academic studies in the United States with a master's in education from the Concordia University. He is a certified trainer for the Ontario Tourism Education Corporation. As an educator, Omar has taught at various public and private colleges across the United States. Omar gives of his time selfishly and serves on various boards, including the Jamaica Tourist Board. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our panelists. Now, research tells us that an inclusive education system where parents' ideas are welcomed and valued allowed for enhanced communication between parents and teachers. In fact, parental involvement in schools also helps to create a positive learning environment that affords children the opportunity to realize their full potential. Isn't that what school is all about? And so today we're going to be delving into this important topic, and we're going to be asking our panelists to share their professional advice with you all. Let me start with you, panelists. First question, why is it important for schools to work collaboratively with parents? And I'm going to start with the lady in the mix, Fiona, and then I will hand over to Mr. Smith and then Mr. Brown, in that order. Fiona.
Thank you for the question. I think last time I was here, I talked a little bit about this.
Yes, certainly.
I will say this, all parents, when we say, why is it important for us to work collaboratively with parents? We're already working, schools are already working with parents. The problem is not that we're not working with any parent. It is that for the main part, the parents that we work with or work closely with are the parents whose social class, and in our context, race, social capital, match those of the school. And so for a good many kids, including those who are more likely to have out of school suspensions and harsh disciplinary measures leveled onto them, are the students whose parents are not, quote unquote, involved in what's happening in schools. Is it important for schools to partner with parents? Absolutely. Yeah. It is important for parents to have a say in the curriculum that we learn at school, in how we discipline students, in how we engage students, in how we work with students to develop the types of skills and knowledges and competencies that they need in order to be successful. I think it's important for us to do everything with schools. But right now, a part of the problem is that we don't do so with all parents.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. Mr. Smith, why is it important?
I think it's important because parents, students, teachers, and by the extension, the institution, when they work collaboratively, it creates an axis of success. Now, that axis of success fosters an optimal learning environment, both at home and both at school. And that environment helps to accentuate both the tapped and the untapped potentials of the students as it relates to shaping their academic and professional futures. Now, since the theme is on discipline, for this to happen, the school must be an environment where good behaviors, attitudes, and a willingness to learn thrives. I am a parent of 13-year-old twins, and they know that a call from the school will bring additional consequences as both myself and the school are on the same page.
Certainly. Yeah, very, very, very powerful. Mr. Brown, you want to weigh in here? Why is it important for schools to work collaboratively with the parents?
If there's a disconnection, it runs a risk of the school not achieve its objective at the end of the day. And why, as relates to discipline, we are focusing on today. we see that where there's a serious gap that once we used to have a greater bond in terms of discipline before the pandemic.
Yeah.
If I share the story about the crab, when I train environment and start walk straight, and you send them home for a weekend, and you start to walk sideways. And that's what we are seeing now. We're out school for a little over a year, and we see a lot of antisocial behavior creeping in our school. But again, that we would have, as a school, have achieved over time, we suddenly start refocusing our children. So it's very important that we, parents and teachers and school are on the same page in terms of discipline, right? One cannot over here and the other one, we have to join on together to solve the problem of discipline, because you might have your angel at home and at school a total different fish at the end of the day. So you have to be connected to the school to know what's happening in the school. So it's very important that the communication on both sides flow to achieve the success that there is.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So we're getting the teamwork and effective communication are two important things. As we look at the importance of the schools work closely with the parents.
Can I just say I love the idea of the angel at home.
Yes. So Dr. Hardware will follow up, and you can speak a little bit more on that, Fiona. Dr. Hardware.
Yeah, so thank you. So before I ask my question, I must say to Richardo that I'm a past student of Ferncourt as well. Not sure if we went the same years, but we went. We went there. Okay, so let's continue. So Mr. Cole started off by highlighting the research which says that parental participation and involvement is incremental to student success. And we acknowledge that some parents, and in Fiona's response, that some parents are not able to actively participate for socioeconomic reasons, or might be time constraints as well, right? So we want to find out from your perspective as parents, how can schools and Parent Teachers Association strategize to foster greater improvement in terms of parental participation? And might we say meaningful parental participation in the classroom and the wider school community? And I'll start with my fellow Ferncourtite, Richardo Brown.
The Parent Teachers Association play a pivotal role in the educational system. We're not just there to actually be the watchdog on one side. We balance the equation. And therefore, it's important that we develop proper skill set, best practices, incorporate persons who are, and do just like what you're doing here, through education of our parents, because there's no manual in rearing a child. So it's very important that we have this sort of discussion, that best practices come out. The parent teachers can lead the initiative by getting stakeholders to come in and to have rap session with our parents. But sad to say, most of the time, as Fiona said earlier, the persons that tend to be a part of these forum are not the persons who are having the issues most of the time, because we see where parents involved in the school system, the children tend to do both disciplinary and academically when they have the parents involved and just continue to sustain that level of bond in the school system. So it's very important that PTA get on board and continue to work. At St. Anne's Bay, we try to include all of our parents in the educational system. We don't have a class system where we say some persons are excluded. Everybody have a equal say in the decision-making process of their children. And I think if island-wide, if we replicate that sort of behavior and practices, we will go a far way at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you very much. Open now to Fiona or Omar, if you'd like to comment.
Omar, you want to go first?
Okay, sure. So I think both Ricardo and Fiona really spoke about leveraging parental influence in terms of fostering participation. And I think the schools need to find the best medium to communicate with the parents to generate enough interest and engagement. Now, I do attend quite a bit of PTAs. I do enjoy them, but sometimes I find that more targeted, intentional relationship building, such as at the beginning of each school semester, I get an email from my kid's teacher. The teacher introduce themselves and leave the door open for me to connect with them. I, in turn, follow up with the teacher, and I would say this is the best means of communication with me. I also give the teacher a quick synopsis of my child's strengths and weaknesses and what areas that I think the teacher needs to focus on. So both myself and the teacher are on the same page. And I think establishing that personal relationship with the school, with the institution, that really goes a long way, not in terms of providing academic feedback, but also in terms of getting a progress on the students' life skills. Now, at my local school here, they have the teacher has a portal, and within that portal, the teacher is able to create like a class page. And us as parents are invited, so we can go real time throughout the day and we can kind of see what activities are going on. It helps to celebrate your students' successes. And the school in turn has a Facebook page that keeps us engaged. There are volunteer opportunities as it relates to field trips, use of an online calendar. So I think there's no really best way for teachers and the institution to communicate, but I think trying to make some effort in establishing a personal relationship both with the institution and with the teacher themselves, I think that goes a long way in terms of building out a platform for meaningful and engaging participation.
Thank you for that. This seems like a very involved school that is willing to engage parents. Thank you for that. Fiona, over to you.
I love the idea of us thinking through meaningful engagement. I mean, getting parents into buildings and then having them participating in bake sales and whatnot. I don't know that is meaningful, meaningful engagement. And though research shows all sorts of things about the positive benefits of parent engagement, there's not a clear sort of causal relationship between it. Is it that the students who we already honor and value are the ones who are likely to succeed, and the fact that their parents show up is neither here nor there, right? Or is there some sort of quid pro quo going on where we know that parent is likely to take us on if we don't, if their students are not doing well, why they tend to do well? Is it that these are those kids who reflect all the values and the norms and whatnot that we already have and that we reward? You know how schools like to reward compliance over any sort of real work. So, you know, the students who are quote unquote well-behaved are the ones who are likely to get high marks. So we have all sorts of things that we're not quite sure about. I remember a few years ago reading this lovely novel. It was a little bit weird, but it was a lovely novel in that it was set in a Pacific island and post-Civil War. And on the island, they burnt all the books, all books except one book was left. And so this guy on the island was using this book to teach the students. But one of the things that they did was they would have different parents coming in each day. And the parents would run a part of the lesson. And so, you know, parents would run a lesson on basket weaving or whatever it is that parents were good at, that's what they would do. And it stuck with me because I love the idea of parents having a say, not just in what we bake and what we sell and what we fundraise for, but in what it is that we consider to be the essential things that students need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are the types of, like, you know, in a country like Jamaica, where we are so creative, right? Like, we're not only critical thinkers, we're creative problem solvers. What would it mean for us to engage parents meaningfully in how they manage things at home? How do you make ends meet with little or nothing? How do you solve problems, right? How do you build community? Like, those to me are essential skills that we ought to be thinking about. How do we inculcate some of those skills in schools? Right now, parent engagement tends to be very sort of school driven. It's the agenda of the school and not the agenda of family. And I wonder how that would change.
Meaningful question for us to ponder on as we go. I'll now hand over to Dr. Walker.
Dr. Hardware, just to add briefly, a vision board, because this is where the students are asked to have vision board at the start of each term. I wonder if our teachers and our parents can also have vision board that we share, and from time to time we see what we are achieving from time to time, to set realistic timeline on that vision board and see how well we can stick, and we fashion it off the children who want, and ensure that we work along that part to ensure that all of us are on the same page.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, and that's also presupposing other other things in the play in terms of helping children also to formulate the vision board and think through some of their ideas. I'll pass it over to Dr. Walker.
All right, thank you so much, Shawnee. You can call me Annette as well. For those of us who are just joining on YouTube or Facebook, we're looking at the topic, collaborating with parents to improve student success, but more so we're specifically zeroing in on student discipline this evening. And one of the things that really stood out to me early in the conversation was Ricardo mentioning, and I think Fiona also seconded that, the whole idea around, we think that kids are, they're angels at home, and perhaps they're doing something else. So that's going to lead me to my next question. So we know that discipline in the classroom essentially helps to make the teaching learning process more effective. And we have recognized that in recent times, especially in the Jamaican context. So for Ricardo is in the Jamaican context, and we know that Omar and Fiona, you're in the Canadian context, two divergent contexts. But we're recognizing as well in Jamaica that there are viral videos going around showing, and also reports showing that students are, having violent altercation with their teachers. So the question I'm posing to the panelists this evening is, how effective are existing disciplinary policies at your child's school? And I want us to start with the Jamaican perspective, Ricardo, and then we'll take the Canadian perspective. Thank you.
All right, for us at Tenants Bay Primary School, the disciplinary system there is very effective. I don't know how the school administration actually perform to get everybody on the same page in terms of discipline. But what I will say, at general devotion every Monday, there are some instructions given that set the backdrop for the rest of the week as to the expected behavior that we expect during the course of the week. We see where that is working very effectively. We actually do a proactive approach in terms of discipline. Look and see what is happening in our wider space and ensure that it does not creep in our local school, because some things tend to trend, especially negative behaviors tend to trend. And the school from grade 1 level right up, the staff are on the same page. As we start to see negative fashion start to creep in our education system. we nip it in the bud right away. And I think that the St. Anne's Bay Primary School, if I may start there, because that's where I'm more intimate with, is doing a very effective job in that area. But in a wider sense, it go back to inclusion of both parents and staff, because children live actually what they learn. And if they are coming into a confined space for a couple of hours, their behavior will not necessarily be of that impactful. At home where they're more relaxed and stuff like that, that's where the best behavior should be modeled. Starting with us as parents, lead by example. So yes, the school administration are doing their part, but it also boils down to the parents. Parents making negative comments about school administration and say if teacher lick you, lick him back, if teacher talk to you, they tell him at order and stuff like that. So it's go back to a working relationship between parents and school. We have to be on the same platform.
Thank you for that. So we're going to turn now to Omar. Would you like to chime in, or Fiona, anyone?
Fiona, you want to go, or I can go ahead?
Whoever wants to go. You want to give it to
I was muted. I can go.
Okay.
So you know, I hear so many different things. In my experience, in my 20 plus years of experience as an educator, a lot of the things that I hear happening sometimes in Canadian schools, but increasingly in Jamaican schools, are things that I've seen in movies, like, you know, where it's an inner city community and some white savior principal or teacher comes in and gets all the little Black children to behave. Like, those are things that I usually see elsewhere, and it's not within my own. It's not within my own purview. What I can tell you is that from the research, and I do a lot of work around student discipline, a lot of the research shows that a lot of these instances that we hear that will go viral, and that often inform disciplinary practices, are not the norm. My own experiences where things like this don't happen in classrooms or in schools is more the norm than not, right? In my 20 years plus, I haven't seen that. Students are respectful and well-behaved, and where you see instances of indiscipline, it very often has to do with how long they take to do their homework. Most of them are perfectly well-behaved. And so I don't know if it's fair for me, especially in situations where students might go into buildings armed, to use what some may call my rose-tinted glasses. What I think is important is that we have to put a lot of this into perspectives. Research also shows that quite a bit of schools that have very punitive measures for discipline are the ones that are more likely than not to have harsh, disciplinary issues that other schools do not have. For me, relationships, which is one of the things that I've heard here, relationships with families and with students, learning that is engaging and meaningful and relevant for students, those are things that are much more likely to have students well-behaved and in their classes learning than not. I think those sort of proactive measures are much more likely to get good returns than schools that are very harsh. And I won't even go into what, like my schooling was. I had a draconian principal from hell in Jamaica in elementary school. So that's, I see Ricardo laughing. I think Ricardo knows a principal like that. He used to have whips that he used to beat the kids. Bloody torture, if you ask me. So, I'm all for instructional practices that engage students rather than some sort of overseer massa beating and
So you're connecting, Fiona, you're connecting that beating, that whipping with the colonial past, yeah?
It absolutely was. And, you know, it's funny today when I thought about this song, when I thought about this, when I thought about, you know, talking about this today, one of the first things that came to my mind was I don't know if you know the song that Sizzla and Capleton did, I don't know how many thousand years ago. It was a long time because it was before I left Jamaica. Where they talk about, you know, there's a line in it that says, you know, here are the students learning about the curriculum that I get is European and teach me about Marco Polo and Napoleon and you know, they didn't learn anything about the River Nile Bank and so on. And, you know, Sizzla goes on to talk about how they slave and murder my mama and Madonna and whatever. Like, students who are in schools who are engaged, who know why they're learning, what they're learning, and it's of value to them, right, are much more likely to connect to what they're doing than learning about something that, you know, has nothing to do with them, right? So I'm all for instruction, meaningful instruction.
All right, so we're getting divergent perspectives. For those of you who are just coming in, I see some participants just chiming or coming in. We are looking at how schools can collaboratively work with parents to improve student success. Specifically, we're looking at the whole idea around discipline. So we're going to ask Omar, Professor Smith, to add to the conversation with respect to this particular question. Go ahead, Omar.
Yes, thank you. Now, my 13-year-old twins attend a school district that comprises of 80,000 students, 161 schools, and over 8,500 teachers and support staff. Now, in May of this year, the CBC reported that for March, just March alone, there were 427 violent incidents across the school district. And that those numbers are really worrying. I don't in particular find them to be alarming, considering what I see happen in other jurisdictions and metropolis, both here in Canada and across the United States. I must say, though, that 427 is a very, to say, a very big number here in Canada. We typically tend to consider ourselves as very peaceful, very calm, and we don't really have that rough and tough image to the rest of the world. Now, that in itself is very troubling and alarming for teachers, because they're now saying the palladium has moved from zero tolerance to almost complete latitude. And many teachers are upset. They are blaming policy decisions that paves the way for students to continue to reoffend. Now, the province at one point, and I know Fiona must be familiar with this, had a zero tolerance approach. And what they found out that that particularly disenfranchised a lot of minority kids and students from lower socioeconomic background. And as a result of that, the zero policy approach, you know, suspensions and expulsions skyrocketed to the point where they had to discontinue that practice. Now, what has happened recently is that the new policy that the government came with gave the principal some discretion in terms of how to apply discipline to the students. And that in itself has not been working the way it should, because the government had came back and now restricted the ability of the school principals to use their discretions. Now, when I juxtapose that with what I see happening in Jamaica in a recent study by the Jamaica Gleaner, it mentioned 8 out of 10 students claim to have witnessed violence in school. It went on to talk about 6 in 10 students said they've actually seen violence in schools, and 4 out of 10 students said they've seen it happen in their home. Now, 3 out of 10, which I find the very most worrying, said that they themselves has inflicted violence on others within the school system. And I think that is cause for concern for us to reflect on our experiences when we're going to school. Definitely, I believe there were issues with behavior, with attitudes, but I don't feel that it was actually as brazen as today, where students are actually physically assaulting teachers and school administrators. And I think this has indicated to us that the disciplinary system that they have in schools, both here in Canada and in Jamaica, is not working. And as a result, it's creating a lot of mental health problems for teachers. And I would love to see that issue addressed. And I see Fiona is cracking up.
Fiona, see that?
I can't wait. I think I'm going to do the indisciplined thing and jump right in. Mark,
yeah, go ahead, Fiona. That's my take.
I will tell you that, and I appreciate your take. One of the issues, for example, you talk about the CBC reporting the sort of quote unquote violent incidents. In a white supremacist nation, violence get reported in particular ways. And I'll say this, who gets to define what violence is can then tell you what violence is or is not happening in schools. I'm not kidding. Like I've worked centrally, and I work centrally now. And a part of my work now actually includes helping to design our student discipline policy in response to a ministerial directive that said we had to do one from a human rights centered approach. In our own board, with a review from the ministry, it found that a significant number of the out of school suspensions that students had didn't even fit the code that the ministry gave for reasons to suspend students. 78% of the suspensions for students in high school were for things that were not coded. So the ministry tells you these are the things for which you can suspend students, and here are the codes that you use when you suspend them. 78%. It found that Black students were 2.2 times more likely than their white peers to be suspended. Some of the reasons for which Black students were suspended included wearing hoop earrings and hoodies. Now, nobody is saying that students should not be suspended, particularly if they're doing things. And they define violence as having a weapon or using a weapon or replica weapons, causing physical harm, sexual assault, robbery, using a weapon. Now, let me tell you what people do. Like you have things like this kid took this $5 from somebody, call the police and get them out in shackles. That's right. Like, so when you hear a report and 400 violent incidents, I want you to know that even that is totally subjective. You'd think that means a thing. It doesn't mean diddly squat. Half of these are not any real incidents. These are people making mountains out of molehill. What is much more likely is that the microaggressions, the racial microaggressions, the incivilities that Black children have to put up with, those LGBTQ students have to put up with, these are the types of things that are real violence that we're not hearing anything about.
If I may add.
No. We have to move on to another question, so I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, we wanted, you said interact, and here we are with me and Omar interacting, and I can tell that Ricardo wants to jump in because
one second. The interaction is wonderful, but also we have to contextualize it for the Jamaican audience, who most of them are on.
I think I have an amazing example like what Fiona described. I'm just going to steal a minute and squeeze it in. So on an online chat forum, a student used a racial epithet to my child. Now, it was brought to the attention of the principal, and I thought the principal would have acted because, after all, the principal does have leverage. But the principal basically called a school meeting and spoke to the students about how they should be respectful, yada, 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 and that was it. There was actually no punitive damage to the students. So I do get what Fiona is saying, that the system unfairly discriminates against some types of students. There's lots of evidence out there, but I think also the system itself, we need better training.
All right, so thank you so much for that. Lively discussion. We we have a few more questions, and we're essentially pressed for time because we want our participants who are here on Zoom to ask some questions. So thanks for that very lively discussion. I want to turn it over now to Mr. Cole. Who is next? The next question.
Thank you, Annette. Yes, we are discussing the importance of schools working closely with parents to improve student success, and our focus today is really on discipline. Discipline and maybe how we discipline, those are quite topical. And so what I want to ask, and my panelists to respond quite briefly, to maybe give maybe 2 points or so, is how can schools, teachers, work with parents to improve discipline? You can maybe put forward 1 or 2 suggestions in terms of how the school, the teachers can work with parents to improve discipline among our children. I'll start with Mr. Brown, then Omar, and then Fiona. Mr. Brown?
Yes, what can be done in this regard? Have individual discussions with the parents, because it's not what one size fits all worked. What worked for one child would not necessarily work for another child. So ask our parents what method of discipline they use at home to effectively punish deviant behavior at home, and work from that perspective. Also, periodically visit the institution to see how the child actually perform, because sometimes you might get a report from the institution, and you want to form the impression and say that, you know, that teacher don't like my child, and my child might talk about, you know, so pick for my child and stuff like that. But if we should go periodically unannounced, and to see some of the antisocial behavior displayed by our children from time to time. Part-time, you can also ask to do part-time sessions with the class, so you can teach a new skill to students. So by you involving in that, if every parent involved in the school with whatever way can impact the positive way, the school system, by going part-time for probably an hour or 2, and do our obsession with the children, and they can get different perspective of life. Because a lot of children might be having behavioral issue, and it seems as if it's the norm, because it's condoned by parents, and because how frequent they do it, the teacher might turn a blind eye to that particular behavior.
Right.
Because they get burnout over time.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Smith, your suggestions in terms of how can parents work closely with the schools, the teachers, to improve the discipline among the children?
So I take my responsibility as a parent really serious in terms of helping my child to grow as a parent. And this is where I need school officials as allies. Now, as parents, we need to recognize that children make mistakes. I think Ricardo and Fiona spoke about that angel child. We need to recognize that even the most loving and caring kid can engage in mean and very insensitive behavior. Okay? So as a parent, I try to assume, I don't assume that my child, when he or she goes to school, lives the same values that reflects in the household. Because as you and I know from experience, it takes years and generations to align values with attitudes. And children by nature are rebellious, they push boundaries, they are very provocative, and they say things without grasping the full implications of the situation. So a suggestion I can put forward is that whenever I get complaints about my child, I separate myself from my child's behavior, because it was actually my child that committed the act. I also have a strong sense of resisting the urge to feel attacked. I think Ricardo spoke about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Also, when you're dealing with a situation, respond specifically to the student's behavior. I find sometimes as parents, I think Ricardo said this, the parent looks for imperfections in the teacher's response to the student's behavior, and that becomes the central theme and not the actual act that was committed.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Quite powerful, Omar. Fiona, how can you can give us maybe 2 suggestions or so? How can parents work closely with schools to improve the discipline?
I think a greater onus is on schools, because schools are the ones who are trained professionals.
Okay.
So that's my first thing. You're trained professionals who understand child development in a way that parents don't necessarily do. I mean, most of us don't have training on how to be a parent, right? Like we just have children, and that's not even an essential part of schooling. Having said that, I think seeing what works at home. You know, what works at home with children? How do you engage children? And if children are behaving like angels at home, what is happening at home where they think that behaving like an angel is good? And how can schools replicate that?
Yeah.
What kind of, how can schools help to create a feeling of belonging and care in schools, right?
Yeah.
So that students want to come and want to participate, don't want to break trust. And want to, feel a sense of citizenship within the school community, so that they'd want their school to be prosperous,
Right.
Right? Like schools that they can frankly go and just learn and feel safe, right? They have a role to play in that. So schools can definitely partner with parents to help to drive that vision.
Yeah, great. I have a follow-up because we're quite familiar that schools would have or should have some policies regarding discipline and other related programs within their environment. You could just indicate if you have ever been, as a parent, because all 3 of you are parents, if you were ever involved in the process of developing any policies at your child's school in relation to discipline. You could just indicate quickly so that we can continue the conversation. Fiona, you're on the floor, so we could just continue with you.
Absolutely. We're currently in response to the directions from the ministry. Our board is in the process of developing a student discipline policy. It is supposed to go, it's still in draft form. I can share the link to it's a public draft. It's on our board website. With a huge focus on a few things. It's written in a structure that centers student learning and well-being. There's a section on relationships. There's a section on building teachers or educator capacity to address issues in culturally appropriate ways. And there's a section on accountability. There's a huge focus for due process and procedural fairness and so on in the disciplinary process. So ours is very sort of system driven.
Okay. Omar, are you involved or were you involved in the process of developing any policies at your child's school in relation to discipline?
Not at my child's school,
or
but
before, yes.
In other capacity, I have been sought for advice in terms of crafting a student code of conduct that really governs discipline. Yes.
Yeah. Mr. Brown?
I was advised against a policy that was developed, I think it's even from the ministry level, where speak about corporal punishment in school.
Yeah.
Parents are forced to sign a document to say no to corporal punishment. And I have my own personal belief that I think it's still have its place, depends on the individual child at the end of the day. Yeah. I am not going to a policy of that nature to be forced on me to say, well, child must not be at school. For must use timeout and all those nice fancy stuff to discipline a child.
Yeah. All right. Shawnee.
I love Ricardo. Ricardo, you're not in any timeout. You're mocking over there, Ricardo.
Dr. Hardware, I'm sure you have a question.
Yes, I was gonna ask a question about whether or not the panelists believe that parents should be responsible for their children's behavior, but from the responses already, I see that you agree that they shouldn't. So I'll ask Dr. Walker to ask the last question before we take the panelists, the questions from the audience.
So parents are to be held accountable?
You're trying to put me off guard. Okay. So, okay. All right. So how can then schools garner the support of parents, particularly those with children who are demonstrating behavioral concerns, to improve students' discipline? And I heard Ricardo saying that he feels it's an individual, basis in terms of discipline. He doesn't have a problem of thinking about corporal punishment. So I think I'm just gonna continue with Ricardo to hear his perspective, like along with that, how can schools, garner or get the support of parents, particularly those with children who are demonstrating behavioral concerns, and that is important to improve students' discipline.
Ricardo will not spare the rod.
Probably I should start that twist here. Some of the children that carry out antisocial behavior are attention seeking while they actually do it. So I think if we start at a place where we capture good deeds and sell those to counteract the negative that social media love to sell. If we can capture good deeds that the children do. I strongly believe pushing for most improve. And those children supposed to get the praise at the end of the day, the children who constantly improve. So I started at a twist there in order to fix that disciplinary issue. But we need to come back together and work with a strategy that fits the child.
What strategy? What strategy do you have?
Discussion is a good way to go. Knowing the child individually. It takes a lot of, it's very time consuming to know children on an individual basis. But it's a very good way to start. Some of us don't like to be correct publicly. Some of us want to be spoken to one way, get best result doing that. Some of us want our parents to appeal to our emotions to actually curtail or correct certain behavior going forward. So this might work for my child and something else might work for your child. As my fellow panelists said a while ago, that what caused a child to be an angel at home, try to find a common ground and bring it to the school system. Give the school administration the same amount of that. You as parents, say, teacher, while the child is at home, you are the parent for a couple hours. And the child needs to know that the teacher have full responsibility in that regard. That the child show that level of respect that show the parents at home to those that are set above them in the school system. So we can work along that line going forward.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Okay, who do I choose next now? I'm gonna go with Fiona, and then I'll take Omar.
I want to say that I love Ricardo. I want to start by I love Ricardo. Yes. I can imagine us both being administrators in the same school. with Ricardo not sparing the rod. I'm thinking, there's Fiona over there spoiling the child. I believe that behavior is communication, and I don't just think that it's a sort of a Canadian type, foreign type thing. I never liked the punitive measures that I saw in schools. When I was a young girl in primary school, the principal was terrible. Like, he would walk around beating people right, left, or center. Like, that made any sort of real difference. I believe in due process. I think, we can say to children, these are the rules. We can co-construct those with kids. We can say, and talk about what it does, right? Like, what does it mean for both of us to work in community with each other? And how is this going to be a good thing for you, and a good thing for me, and a good thing for everybody involved? I think we talk about consequences. I think we, as adults, we are fair, and we practice justice every day. And the more difficult the circumstance is, then the more fair and equitable and just you become. And I think that those are things that work. The beating and the carrying on, like, I don't know who it would help. Let us think about the Maroons. The harsher you get, the more subversive people become, the more people will have to do what they have to do to stay alive, right?
So what about in terms of recommendations then? Because you're discussing then the whole idea of looking at other means to improve student discipline. But what recommendations would you Fiona give to the Jamaican audience as well? Because I know that your work, particularly now in the Canadian context at the Peel School District School Board, is that you're also looking at that whole idea around discipline. So what advice would you give for those of us who are viewing from Jamaica as well, and even here in Canada? What advice would you give?
Well, for teachers, and I say over here all the time, is that I went to teachers college. I don't know what they all do here. But, we do a lot of work around instruction, right? And so how do we ensure that learning is at what we call the zone of proximal development? So kind of like a sweet spot, right? It's not too challenging where you can't engage, and it's not too easy that you get bored too quickly and throw it over, right? And so you make it so that learning is effective. It's relevant and authentic and meaningful for children. You practice fair play and justice. You model it for students, and you ensure that the processes that staff is using, those processes are also fair and just for everyone, right? And you make those things clear. You have things that are supportive and restorative, and not only corrective, but certainly corrective. There has to be clear consequences as well. And that, as you're making a decision about who does what, that you're saying to folks that these are the consequences that you have, and students buy into it. And not just from my experience here, I taught in Jamaica before I moved to Canada. Right. And those are things that I found worked. Don't talk to, I don't remember if it's Ricardo or if it was Omar talked about respect and not sort of dissing kids or treating kids less than in spaces where you give them no choice but to respond likewise, right? Like, the adults cannot be like kids in the building. You have to be the adults. Foster good relationships with transparent relationships. Make sure you and parents are on the same wavelength, and go from there. I think those are some of the long-standing strategies that we've used that work.
Thank you, Omar. Sorry if I interrupted, Fiona.
No. I'm just teasing Ricardo by saying, let's throw away the sticks.
Okay.
So I want to start by echoing a lot of what Fiona said. I do believe if we have children live what they learn, and if we're positive role models at home and model a certain behavior, the child will more likely fall in line. Now, having said that, I think many of us as parents sometimes do not take the opportunity to learn about the disciplinary process that exists in schools. And many of the times that it is brought to our attention is when it intersects with our child, and our child is being punished. And we now say, hey, what type of policy is this? What's going on about this? So I think one way we can help to improve the concern is by learning about whether it's a student code of conduct, whether it's a disciplinary process, before something goes wrong.
Mhm.
And I also would encourage for us as parents to have that good personal relationship. I spoke about it earlier, because if there's a relationship of mutual trust, if there are changes at the home, you can communicate to the teacher, to school administrators in confidence, and they can know that there are some little things that maybe is not right at the home, and it
Mhm.
might impact the child in a certain way. So there can be an early warning system there.
Mhm.
The next thing I'd want to say is for us to consider ourselves as partners with the school, and we must explain to the children that rules must be followed. Now, I'll share with you a story from one of my colleagues that said a grade 2 student lost their temper, hit another child, and they called in the parent for a meeting. And the mother was very confrontational, because she was saying, hey, I teach my child to stand up at home, and I'm glad the child is able to use their fists, and then the kid was looking both at the parent and at the school administrator, obviously baffled regarding the school is saying this is wrong and the parent is saying this is right. So the teacher pivoted and changed tactics very quickly and say, this might be the rule at your home,
Mhm.
but in schools, it's different. And no child is allowed to hit another child here. No, not ever. So I think examples like what I just cited can be a platform to build on as we seek to tackle the scourge of indiscipline in schools.
Thank you so much. So we're recognizing that we have our panelists here. We've gone over by 4 minutes, and we're trying our best to stay within the hour, but I'm putting my panelists on the spot. We're gonna take, is it okay if we take 5-10 minutes out of your time to take questions from our participants? Is that okay?
Yes.
Is that okay, Miss Fiona?
Absolutely.
All right,
No
so
problem.
for those of us who are here this evening, we're now taking questions. You can pose your questions to the panelists. You may raise your hand, or if you would like to send your question via chat, one of us will be able to also read your question. So it's now open to the floor. This is like we're in class and everybody's quiet and there's this silence.
I'm not seeing any questions as yet, but just wanted to highlight, since we're waiting, based on my research is on student engagement, and I taught at an inner city school. So I'm aware that there are times in which, those disciplinary problems do come into the school, with even parents coming to fight school administrators, etc. But I want to highlight the importance of relationships and building trust with students and community in terms of helping with this disciplinary matter, but also acknowledging that these things do happen. I remember my first time in the classroom, I saw a chair fly past me and I ran out of there, and I was and my coordinator was like, Miss Hardware, you can't leave the students alone. So relationships are very important, and as Fiona was mentioning, consequences too. Students should know that the process is fair, etc. So I have a question about the impact of social media and discipline. So I'll ask the person to expound, but I think they're talking about perhaps what impact social media has on school discipline, or how children engage with the teaching and learning process.
I think one of the particularly with COVID and the move to learning so much more online, we've seen a real uptick in instances of bullying, cyberbullying. We've seen an uptick in discriminatory slurs and so on used or leveled against marginalized students. with social media. There's quite a bit of that on social media. There's also an increase in issues of sexual abuse or trauma caused by sort of rampant social media use. So those are some of the things that we're seeing, that it is totally exacerbating disciplinary issues in schools.
Mm-hmm. So the person clarified to say, in light of them having more screen time than with their parents. So it's the online classes, if that could creep into them perhaps being more on social media sites and less maybe adult regulation.
Well, I think that's the increase, right? Like with more screen time and more access, because I think a lot of school boards and whatnot moved to ensure students had access to technology. So did families, right? And we had to do it quickly. So a lot of that came without the sort of guidance that parents normally would play into what students have access to or what they can see or not see. So let's go back to the idea of relationships. Mm-hmm. And how that, right? Like what people are doing now with each other in terms of cyberbullying. It's important that we're ensuring that students understand that these are people that their behavior is impacting, right? So.
I saw a hand that was up. I'm not good with pronouncing names, so forgive me. Is it Yara Walker? If I pronounce your first name incorrectly, my apologies. You had your hand up.
But we should also allow the other panelists, if they have that want to comment as well. We'll take
all right, quickly. The social media now, it's actually taking a negative turn on our children. In recent time, I saw my daughter actually watching something as to how to get her parents upset. And it's
not say spare the rod or the other way around. not your child.
No, I'm
your angel, right?
And they are coming with some sucking ways of doing it that the children gravitate towards. Those things that are something positive that they are actually teaching at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So we have to safeguard our children by as best as possible. Police their social media space, because persons have different agenda out there. Those persons, the diverse community want to impact in some way or the other. So as parents, we need to have some control. But they want to tie it with your cell phone, so you can monitor what the child is. Because sometimes when you think that they are actually in class, then turn the volume on the device way down and listen to something or watching something totally unrelated to school. And that's one of the reasons why you see so much antisocial behavior coming in. Not what they actually taught at home during the pandemic is what they actually absorb online that they are playing out now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So Amar, did we lose Amar?
Yes. I can't speak directly to what our colleague Ricardo just spoke about, but what I can tell you is that most school policies or student code of conduct reaches outside of the immediate school environment. So it also features in the online platforms. So if students are engaged in negative behavior online, whether it be bullying, whether it be cheating or any other type of behavior that is inconsistent with good school policies, they run the risk of being disciplined by the schools. And it's something that in my current capacity now is something that we're very strict on, very robust, because a lot of bad behaviors tend to surface themselves online. And in many instances, students either feel too embarrassed or shame to bring it to the attention of administrators. So what I'm saying, that the disciplinary component in schools should extend to online platforms where students engage in bad behavior.
Okay, thank you. So one
And
question.
it's included in ours. Cyberbullying is included in, or disciplinary policies extend to your online behavior. Online.
All right, thank you. So another question is, what strategies have the government implemented to reinforce discipline since the pandemic? So in light of the new challenges presented at the time when we're doing online learning, and different challenges with face-to-face as we see increases in disengagement in various capacities, have the government developed different policies to address these? Perhaps, Mr. Cole, you can speak to as your capacity as a principal, but leave me to the principal, to the panelists.
Thank you, Shawnee. Yeah, since the pandemic, it has been a learning process for all of us. I have always shared that, especially as a principal or even a teacher, we weren't prepared for this. And so I know that there are discussions now in relation to looking at policies that can be used in this context where some schools going forward will still have to utilize the online platform as a mode of delivering the curriculum. So there is a general policy that schools use, which is to promote positive discipline. And that is something that I personally endorse and support, and has been utilizing it as much as possible at school. It is applicable to being at school physically as well as being online. You reinforce and reward positive behavior. You take the time out to discuss, as Fiona would say, to point out to the children, to dialogue with them areas of concern, what the expectations are, and to have a conversation with them, because children are people and they have minds, they can think. And so sometimes it requires a conversation as well, and to establish expectations, and so that they can adhere and work with them.
All right, I think we have the person Walker. They had their hand up a long time ago.
They said that their their tablet was giving trouble, so I'm asking them if they're unable to unmute to text their question to us.
Okay.
Anyone else with any question?
Right.
We're giving you a couple more seconds.
I do have a comment to make though, and I think as Mr. Cole just spoke about, being caught flat-footed, not only Jamaica, but I think many jurisdictions were caught flat-footed as it relates to the pandemic. And I think as we look at indiscipline, in addition to many other factors that are affecting the educational industry as a whole, I think there has to be more emphasis put on budgetary allocation towards education. I saw this year in Jamaica, the finance minister said this is the biggest budgetary allocation despite the pandemic. In Jamaica, we spend $932 US per capita per student. In the United States, that number is $11,000 per student. In Ontario here, that number is $14,821 per student. And if we were to compare that with Barbados, which we can say is a model, they spend an average $3,200 per student. Now, interestingly, and Mr. Brown, I know he can give a take on this, the indiscipline that we see in the school is a reflection of what goes on in the wider society. And on law enforcement and justice, the Jamaican government spends $146 US per capita. So we can see there that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we need a lot of resources to fix the problems.
Mm-hmm. This is very true. And I like that you brought in the Caribbean context. So we're comparing more apple to apple rather than maybe apples to cherries, which are so expensive here.
You know,
Okay.
you know, that average amount we're spending on everybody, you have some people are way below that average and some people way on top. But that's probably for another day.
So that's all about equity. So
that's the average, but the per capita ratio that we use, the funding formula that we use, particularly, for example, in Ontario, marginalizes new immigrant children, second language speakers, Black children. So, but that's for another time. We don't all get the same amount.
Yeah.
Okay, so Walker doesn't want to ask a question, so I guess we can wrap up now.
Yeah.
Quickly before we go, I must add, quickly before we go, I just want to caution all of us as parents. A lot of us are trying to use our children to live the life that we wanted to live during school. And we measure the success that they are having as what we want for ourselves. So we need to look at that. The word discipline, want the child to be the perfect child that we wanted to be then. But when we face with the real world and the behavior that we used to behave, we behave as if we was the perfect child at school. And the whole top grade, they want the child to, you know, drop out of the high school bus or whatever, not be the subject. You want to ensure that what define as success, the amount of skills you can get or keep, that's defined success for our children. But I think it's about developing the whole man, the skill set, the discipline, the way a male is supposed to treat a female, the way a female is supposed to treat a male, and vice versa. So we need to look at the whole in that broad context. Not to focus on just getting the child to read well, to do well at the academic courses and stuff like that. We need to ensure that they have a decision in terms of what is their success, because every child have a different potential, and sometimes they tend to act out because we are pushing them to they start to act out certain negative behavior that we deem to be antisocial.
Yes.
We need to hear them some more.
Okay, Mr. Brown, thank you for that. And with that, we'll close. So, a very riveting conversation today as we continue or continued from the last 2 weeks on collaborating with parents, focusing more specifically on discipline and how that collaboration can help in terms of improving school discipline. Would like to thank the panelists for spending their time with us. We know your time is invaluable, as well as members of the audience. Special thanks to the persons also viewing online. We're looking forward to continuing our conversations around educational issues and policies in Jamaica, and we'll announce our next session. We would like you to follow us on our social media platforms. We're very active, or we're trying to be active on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and it always, and YouTube, and it always mentioned TikTok, so she needs to tell us where that is. And we're asking the panelists to remain behind for 5 minutes. And I see that Ms. Joan Pickney, who was one of our past panelists, had joined briefly, and we want to thank her for joining us today. All right, so over to you, Mr. Cole.
And Lavana as well. Lavana.
Oh, Lavana is here. Okay, thank you, Lavana.
Hi, Lavana.
Hi. It was very informative. I love the discussion. Just one little thing. I'm in a inner city school. We finish?
Yes.
And just to point out, and it's how you portray yourself to the kids. How you portray yourself to the kids. You get that response in everything you do with the children. I can say that because of my experience.
Mhm,
working in an inner city violent community with children.
mhm.
Yeah,
Thank you for
yeah.
sharing
So
that.
yeah, definitely. It was great.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work, guys.
Thank you all for coming.
I quite like this one.